I've got a whole raft of slides. I think William will attest to the fact that I never get to get through all the slides. And the reason is the very good one, and that is that people ask questions. No matter how silly you think your question is, it's a great question. So if you feel that you would like to ask a question, please just put up your hand, we'll stop and we'll get to answer that question, and I'll tell you as much about it as I can. So please feel free to ask questions. I can almost see, William, that we're not going to get to the end of the slides, but there we go. I'd be happy not to get to the end of the slides. Who am I? I'm Dr. Johan. I'm a psychiatrist, and my speciality in psychiatry is mental health for older people. And I look, therefore, after people over the age of 65, but I don't think you'll be surprised that a certain percentage of my patients in memory clinics are under the age of 65. My youngest patient, who was worried about dementia, was 27 years old. But generally speaking, people are about 45, 50 years old. The majority of my patients are in their 80s. I run a memory clinic. I used to run one in Luton and in South Bedfordshire. Because of reorganisation, my memory clinic now is only in South Bedfordshire. So let us begin at the beginning. I'd like you to meet a fictitious gentleman. His name is John Harvey. Now, John is 78 years old. He's a married man, and his wife is Betty. Betty is a born warrior. Now, John is a retired man. He and his wife have 3 adult children. And as you can see, the children are spread about the countryside quite a bit. The closest one is possibly Betty. Is Dawn, or Daniel, who lives in Exeter and Hill. Now, John has been great because he's decided that he's going to go to Open University. He studied for a degree, and he was very pleased to have done so because he's now a senior, he was a senior civil servant. So he's retired on a pretty good pension. Now, his pastime is restoring vintage motorcycles, and he and his wife are regular church attenders, and as you can see, they enjoy seeing their grandchildren, and they belong to a Scrabble circle, and John does pretty well at Scrabble. Then also you'll notice that John and Betty go shopping, and John does what men should do, and that is push the trolley and pay the bill, and Betty actually chooses the shopping. Now, both of them are very much independent in terms of their personal care. I'm afraid that is where the bliss ends. Now take note of what is happening to John. Number one, he's been a smoker, was a smoker for 15 years. A little alarm bell rings in my head. And then the second is that he's got high blood pressure or hypertension, and he's on treatment for it. He suffers from angina. Angina is a condition where there is narrowing of the blood vessels around the heart, which then causes chest pain, shortness of breath, and so forth. That rings an alarm bell. And equally so, he has got high cholesterol, so a high fatty content in his blood, and that worries me. Now, 2 years ago, so let's say 2012, John was admitted to the local hospital. He had an infection of the skin and the tissue underneath the skin in both his legs, and that's called cellulitis. Now, the remarkable thing about that, it's easily treated with an antibiotic. But in his case, whilst he was there, he developed a delirium. A delirium means that he became very confused. He might have been seeing things. He was resisting care. He was quite aggressive, very suspicious. But after the course of antibiotics, things quietened down. John went home and the delirium cleared up completely. Now that to me rings an alarm bell, and we'll talk about that in a moment. However, something is now really amiss because Betty tells her daughter Dawn a number of things about her husband and her father. It seems that he's a changed man. This has been going on for about 6 months. What has happened is he's now misplacing things and doing silly things, like, for example, putting the sugar into the refrigerator, but worse than that is putting things like milk into the oven. Also, he's forgetting conversations. Now, this isn't, I'm afraid, the typical man scenario where you listen with one ear and goes out the other. He was, in fact, forgetting what his wife was telling him, and he couldn't recall the conversation. Betty got cross with him, and he said, "I'm sorry, but I really don't remember the conversation we had." And he wants Betty to be with him at all times. Now think about it. He's starting to struggle with things. So if your brain is slowing down, you want somebody whose brain hasn't slowed down. So he attaches himself to Betty, because Betty will get him out of fixes. He's got lost at the supermarket and couldn't find his car. Now, before you smile, it happens to me, and I know that I'm not developing dementia, and I'm sure it's happened to you. But always remember that one swallow does not make a summer. And we can talk about that phenomena in a moment. And he's now become quite frustrated with himself when he forgets things or can't do things, and he's arguing the toss with Betty, something that he did not do in the past. And I suppose the thing that really broke the straw was the fact that he told Dawn that Dawn has got nice boobs and a sexy bum. Now this is a man who never said anything like this before. So definitely a change. And he watches EastEnders, but I fear he's now having difficulty in following the story and knowing why certain characters are doing certain things. So what they did, Betty and Dawn went to the GP, Dr. Khan, and they gave Dr. Khan some further information. The information was that he now needs to be reminded to take his tablets for high cholesterol. He also needs to take reminded to take his high blood pressure tablets. And also, he says, "I've had a shave," and Betty says to him, "You haven't." He says, "I have," and she says, "Feel your beard." He says, "There's nothing wrong." He's forgotten to shave. Also, his car has become what I call a dementia car. A car that's developed a lot of scrapes and bumps to it in a very short space of time. He's struggling to use the TV remote control. Give you an example. I went to see a person last Thursday. This gentleman is unfortunately bed-bound. And when he was trying to switch the TV channels, he was using his headphones and fiddling with the controls on the headphones to change the channel. And obviously this is something that was happening to John. He lost interest in his vintage motorcycles. He was telling Betty, I don't want to go to church, you go. Also, he had forgotten to pay council tax for a period of 3 months. He was trying to put his cardigan on back to front, something which he had never done in the past, and he was asking Betty to make everyday decisions. What colour socks must I put on? What trousers do you think I should put on? Do you think I should have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee? Now, I dare say that you would consider that something is going wrong. This man has changed over time. So let's look then at the warning signs of dementia, because all of what I showed you were warning signs. Let's go back just a bit and ask you just to put up your hand and tell me what you think warning signs of dementia are. I've got 10, and those are considered to be internationally acceptable, but you take a chance. What do you think? Think about John. What are the warning signs? Who'd like to break the ice?
Loss of inhibition.
Aha, so he was inhibited in the past. He wouldn't say something like she's got nice boobs and a sexy bum, and he's become argumentative. He's become easily frustrated. Clearly he's lost his inhibitions. Anything else?
Self-neglect.
Please, sorry.
Losing short-term memory, forgetting what you've done the day before.
So can you then just take one step ahead? What do you think goes in dementia? Short-term memory or long-term memory? Short-term. I would often ask a person, what's your memory like? And they say, oh, I can remember everything. I can even remember where my first school was. Do you want to know its name? And what I have to remind the person is that I agree with you, your long-term memory is spot on. The difficulty is short-term memory. And there was somebody else who, please?
Self-neglecting.
Yes. Yes, clearly he's not as aware of his personal care and his appearance as he was before. Yes.
Decision-making.
And he's now reluctant to make decisions because possibly he can't remember what he must base his decision on. Anything else?
Lack of spatial awareness.
Do you want to just describe that?
Particularly parking the car, lining up into a bay, or going too far, leaving the car too far forward or going too far back, if you're in a situation where there's lots of car spaces.
So spatial awareness means that you know where you are in space. For example, you know that there isn't somebody sitting next to you, whereas somebody else knows there is somebody sitting next to me, in front of me, and behind me. So when you fling out your arm, you're going to be careful about knocking somebody else. Spatial unawareness is where you lost that awareness of space, hence the motor car. Any other pointers? Yes?
Putting things in the wrong place as well.
So, is that what you do? You put things in the wrong place? No,
Me?
no. Is that what he does?
Arthur would put coins in the spectacle case.
So coins into a spectacle case instead of his wallet. Okay, thank you. Some other examples? Yes.
Repeating himself.
Yes. Repetition or repetitive questions and repetitive statements, saying the same thing over and over again. And you were going to say?
Relying absolutely on me for everything.
So it's a matter of you are the brains, and he's aware that his brain function is very frail. So all decisions you have to make. This just before coming here, I met a lady whose husband has got dementia. And she said they moved house. And she said how awful it was where previously a husband was the decision maker and would sign papers and make decisions about money, and she was suddenly left to do everything, and that caused her stress levels to go through the ceiling. So thank you very much for that. Any further points?
Repetition of activity.
Sorry?
Repetition of an activity.
And do you know the other term for that? Is purposeless behaviours.
Oh, right.
And a particular purposeless behaviour amongst women who have dementia is, for example, folding and unfolding washing, or folding and unfolding tissues, or ripping tissues into very small pieces.
Yes,
Absolutely purposeless. And the other one is wandering, just aimlessly walking up and down. Thank you very much. So please.
My brother-in-law is only 72. He said everything he can, plastic bag, elastic band, and then his wife, she's fed up with it because she will have a thyroid. She threw it away even though I remember.
Okay, very much the same type of thing that I would be seeing and hearing about on a daily basis. And there was somebody in, yes, you carry on.
Withdrawing from social situations.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. The suggestion was withdrawing from social situations. Think of what John did. He stopped being interested in vintage motorcycles. He didn't want to go to church anymore. And it's almost as if a person becomes very comfortable with the space they're living in. And it's almost as if their world is imploding. And we would like to suggest why. Try and get into a person with dementia's mind. Why are they withdrawing from activities? Yes?
It's like disengaging from the norm because they're scared of the world around them. It's not familiar anymore.
What is the most important word she used? Scared. Scared. A person becomes anxious because you might say, come on, let's go to Asda. And the person with dementia will say, Asda, that sounds scary. Wonder how many people there are. Who's going to take me there? Will I get lost? If I need to go to the toilet, will I find the toilet? Who's going to bring me back? Oh, maybe Betty is trying to get rid of me and she's going to dump me at Asda and she's going to drive away. It's very scary. You do become very anxious. And that's another reason for the isolation, is that anxiety. Please.
What about cooking and things,
Tell me about that.
My nan, it was a couple of months back now, but she put a melon in the oven and she forgot to put the cooker on, so we had to have the gas switched off, and she can't basically do much for herself now.
So a melon got put into the oven. She switched on the oven, forgot the melon was there, so now they've had to disconnect the stove. Short-term memory comes into that, but also inappropriate things. And what you've hinted at is actually a very important part of these warning signs of dementia, is the person is now struggling to be able to sequence things. I heard of an Indian gentleman who used to make the meals in his house, and he knew exactly what ingredients to put in and the time for the ingredients to put in. And he started mixing things, leaving out ingredients, overcooking stuff, or serving up stuff which was raw. Clearly, he was forgetting the process. Thank you very much for that. So, if we can have a look then at these warning signs. Memory we spoke about. We spoke about solving problems. Third is the difficulty of familiar tasks. We covered that. Confusion, we covered that. And the visual images we spoke about. And also words, difficulty in speaking and finishing sentences. We didn't talk about that. But especially in Alzheimer's disease, a person struggles to find the right word. And guess what? In one of the tests we do, we will ask a person, what is this? And the person's eyes will gleam and they'll start pointing at it, knowing exactly what you do with this and what's inside it when you take it apart, but they can't come by the name. And then in the same test we say, what is that? And again, the person knows exactly what it is, but the word has gone. And finishing sentences, two things happen. I've heard families will tell me that the person starts an explanation, telling a story, will get halfway, stop, and say, oh, I've forgotten what I wanted to say. Or what they'll do, they'll start the story, and the story will tend to deviate from the original topic and end up somewhere completely different. Misplacing things, we spoke about that. Poor judgment or inhibition, we spoke about that. Withdrawal from social activities, and the last one, changes in mood. And what I want to just point out there is families have taught me that there is a symptom of dementia which I don't find in textbooks, and that is a person with dementia will have good days and bad days, or good mornings and bad mornings, or good hours and bad hours. And as the dementia progresses, you find that the good periods become shorter and more infrequent, and the bad times become more frequent. But always still, people will be surprised that a person with quite advanced dementia will still come up with something, and nobody would have expected that. They thought, wow, where did they come from? Where did they remember that from? Or where did they dredge that out of their brain? Good times and bad times. So this is a description. I'm not going to ask you to write this down, but there we go. We're going to end up with a definition of dementia. So would you like to go with me line by line? Which ones in the first line are true?
Nervous system.
Sorry, say it again.
Nervous system?
Almost. None of them are true. Let's look at the second line.
Middle one, incurable.
The middle one, it's incurable. I'm afraid. At this stage, it's incurable. The next line, starting with reasoning and judgment, untrue. Next one, cause is the death of neurons. I'm going to ask the nursing students, what is a neuron? Is a nerve cell, and more specifically is a brain cell. So a neuron is a brain cell. So what they're saying is the cause is the death of neurons. Students, is that true or untrue?
It's true.
It's true. So it's a death of brain cells. Next one is only memory is affected. No. Next one, the cause is death of brain cells. Just to reiterate that brain cell is the same as a neuron. Is it reversible? No. Next one, does it get progressively worse? Most higher brain functions are affected. Both of those are true. Next line. Which one is true? In the second to last line. It is a brain disorder. Very often somebody in early dementia will say to others, everything is normal up to here. Everything below is normal. Everything above is abnormal. So it's a brain disorder. Nervous system means the whole body's nerves. Okay. And reasoning and judgment are affected?
Yes.
Yes, of course. So here we go with the definition. And this is the definition that I would like you to take away with you today. So when you are talking about it afterwards, about it tomorrow, these are the 6 things that I would like you to remember. First of all, it's a brain disorder. It is progressive. It's irreversible. It's caused by the death of neurons or brain cells. The higher brain functions are affected, and there's executive dysfunction. Now that word will come across in just one of the next slides. But to me, those are the 6 points in a definition of dementia. So you might say higher brain function. Haven't heard of that. He hasn't mentioned that. Those are the higher brain functions. And we've already heard that it is memory, but it is not long-term memory. It is short-term memory. Going down, I'd like you to have a look at the 4th one, which is comprehension. Because very often, a man looking after his wife who's got dementia will actually say, she never listens to me. When I ask her to do something, she's unable to do it. Why is it that she is so stubborn? She's not stubborn. She can't understand the words. So, nursing students, a clue then on how to talk to somebody with dementia is to use chunking. Chunking means breaking up a sentence into short little parts and sometimes repeating that part. So, if you are going to go to the bathroom with somebody with dementia, you will say, stand up. That's all. The person stands up. We're going to walk towards that door. We're going there. You do that, and then you say, we're going to the toilet. So you chunk the information. The person with dementia is unable to understand long sentences. The executive dysfunction is what I told you about the person forgetting how to do things. Imagine something as simple as making yourself a hot drink. Let's say a cup of coffee. If you think about it, you are breaking it up into pieces, into little steps. The person with dementia won't put the coffee into the cup, will put the coffee into the kettle. The person with dementia might then pour the cold water from the kettle with the coffee in it into their cup. They might, in fact, load the cup with a lot of sugar. They will put the cup down to go and answer a telephone or go to the toilet and forget that they've actually made the cup of coffee. So the steps go awry. And that is why everyone who looks after a person with dementia will help the person to say things like, right, you've got your trousers on, can you do up your belt? You've done up your belt, can you put on your socks? You are telling the person, you're giving them clues as to what the next step might be. Then we come to this slide, which is a lovely slide because the slide on the left-hand side shows a normal brain. Look at the slide on the right-hand side and it is smaller. Now, your information from this afternoon is such that you can tell me why the brain on the right-hand side, the brain with the person from dementia, why is it smaller? It is? Why? Why is it shrunk? The loss of brain cells, the loss of neurons. Okay, it has become smaller. And unfortunately, brain cells don't repair themselves. So when you've lost them, I'm afraid they're gone. Then we get on to number, and here I'm going to ask, yes please.
Could I just ask what's the difference between vascular dementia and Alzheimer's?
Okay, I'm going to come to that, but rather than saying we'll wait for the next slide, I'm going to say to you that if you listen to languages, what you're hearing is people talking using grammar and using words put together in a meaningful way. Languages. But you and I know there are different types of languages. French, Spanish, English, Italian, Chinese, and so forth. Think now upon dementia being like languages. And now think that there are different types of dementia. And one of those dementias is called Alzheimer's disease, and one of those dementias is called vascular dementia. If you just give me a moment, we'll then look at what is the difference between the two. I know some of you might actually be burning to say what the answer is. So just very quickly, what is the difference between Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia? Take a plunge. Would you like to?
I think Alzheimer's disease is where the brain cells are dying in the brain. Vascular dementia is where there's been a break of oxygen to the brain caused by possibly a heart attack or some trauma to the body.
So you're on the right track. Vascular means blood vessels, doesn't it? So it's a type of dementia which is caused by brain cells being starved of oxygen and nutrients. For instance, a stroke would be could lead to a vascular dementia. And just to tell you, you might have said, John was smoking for 15 years. What's smoking got to do with dementia? In smoking, we find that the blood vessels become quite rigid. They lose their elasticity. When they lose their elasticity, it's easier for fatty deposits to accumulate on the inside of the brain, of the blood vessels. That narrows them, and it narrows them to the degree that not enough oxygen is getting to the brain cells. So you were right. It's a matter of brain cells misfunctioning because of the lack of oxygen and nutrients. Is that enough for the time being?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So, number of people with dementia in the UK. So, just to help you, it's in its hundred thousands. What would you say? Yes, 800,000 people. I happened to listen to the radio the other day. How many people in the UK? I heard it's 63 million. And you're saying, wow, 800,000 and 63 million, that's not very much at all, is it? Okay, but we'll talk about that. So, what will the number be in 2030? 1.2 million. 1.2 million. Now the immediate question is it because we are inheriting dementia? Is it because there is something in the water or in the air? Is it possibly pollution? Why is it that more people are going to be developing dementia in 2030? And it just needs a very short answer, and I'm sure you're going to give it to me. Sorry, you were... The answer is we're living longer, aging. That's the reason there's more dementia. And also because if you open the Express, the Daily Mail, other newspapers, front page says cure in dementia, or it's a national disgrace, dementia, is because the government and the popular press are talking more and more about dementia because it is important. It really is important. That's why there are going to be more people in 2030. Now this one, and I can almost see the nursing students puffing themselves up a bit, because does a college university education, does it protect you from dementia? Let me put up your hands. Who think it does protect you? One person, two people. And who says it doesn't protect you? Wow. Okay. Let me explain. You were right. Julie, you were right. It does protect you. Let me explain why. There's a term called cognitive reserve. Cognitive means brain function reserve. It's almost like a reserve tank in a motor car, petrol tank. It means that the more you challenge your brain, the more information that you gather in early life at college, university, apprenticeship, and so forth, the more your brain builds up a reserve. That reserve then carries you throughout life, so that when you get to your 70s and 80s, it's almost as if your brain can carry on a bit longer before it develops dementia. So two schoolboys that have been to the same school, played the same sport, come from the same suburb in a town, same area in a town. One goes to university, the other decides, I'm not going to do this, and goes, for example, to join the army. Now, the boy with the university degree, his cognitive reserve will be greater than the boy that went to the army. If it came to the two developing dementia, you will find that the boy that went to the army will possibly develop a dementia earlier rather than the chap that went to university. So, in effect, it is a university education. College education does protect. And you were going to comment?
I was just going to say, would other activities increase that cognitive reserve? Like if say you were a soldier that played chess, does other things contribute to that, not just education?
Yes, absolutely, yes. But it doesn't mean if you have a brain game and you fiddle with it for about 20 minutes each day, that is going to build up the reserve. It needs to be more extensive than that. But anything you do that stimulates the brain can increase that cognitive reserve. What is the greatest risk factor for developing dementia? We've said it. Aging. Next one. What percentage of people at age 65 will develop dementia? So it's under 10%. 5%. Now, what percentage of people at age 90 will develop dementia? 30%. 30%. Now, to me, that's a good news story because if we are as lucky to get to the age of 90, 66% of us, 66 out of 100, will have memory difficulties but related to our age. We will not develop dementia. So the good news story is that dementia is not an inevitable outcome of the aging process. If you're at age 80, 20 or 1 in 5 people will develop dementia. The other 80% will not develop dementia, but will do things like I do, and watching maybe a television soap, and at intermission or the commercial break will go upstairs. Why did I come upstairs? And I'm sure you've done exactly that. That isn't dementia, that is age-related memory. Yes? I'm going to ask that we hang on to that question. So let me just repeat your question. Question was, is there a genetic link related to dementia? I will come back to that. What is the size of the budget in the UK for dementia care? Okay, it's silly money. It's £23 billion, but it brings it into check. It makes it more real if I told you that the budget for heart disease, the budget for stroke, and the budget for cancer care, all put together, is less than that paid out in dementia care. So it's a lot of money. Where does the money go to? It goes into social care, making sure that people are well cared for in their own homes or in care homes. So the major budget is into social care. And this one, what is the largest subtype of dementia? Think of languages and Alzheimer's disease, yes. And how many people under the age of 65 will develop dementia? We said it was 5%, but how many? Which one of those three?
6.5.
It's 15,000. It's 15,000, but those of you who might know somebody with dementia who was a young onset dementia will know that it is very much the tip of an iceberg. Because a young person whose memory is fading will possibly be told you're stressed, or possibly be told you've got depression. What doctors and other health professionals don't think about is dementia, was only old people get dementia. So very often a young person with dementia is misdiagnosed. So I think the real figure is something like 45,000 people under the age of 65 that develop dementia. What percentage of people with dementia are diagnosed and treated? Anybody percentage? Anybody like to hazard a guess?
10%.
Phew. Fortunately, I think we're a bit better than that. So, anybody else? You say 65? Wow. Marion? We wish. We wish. Okay, the answer is that before the National Dementia Strategy in 2007, before we started talking about dementia, a third of people with dementia were actually given a diagnosis. And that is a tragedy. That's a disaster. That's a crime. A third of people with dementia were actually given a diagnosis. And it's because of the National Dementia Strategy, because of the government, because of champions like Terry Pratchett, and think of Iris Murdoch, and think of the radio announcers whose parents have got dementia. Because of that, there are more and more people coming forward with memory difficulties, and we diagnose them. And I'm very pleased to say that in our neck of the woods, it's about, is it 47%, Marion? It's about 47%, and that is about the national average, which means then we've got a long way to go yet. And believe it or not, this meeting today is one of those ways in which we can raise awareness and in which people can be offered for them to go to GPs, to be referred to us to make the diagnosis. And if we have a look at this one, this slide just shows you on the left-hand side is the years 2005, and you go to the right-hand side and it's the year 2051. The first left-hand side vertical line shows you where we are at the moment, at 800,000 people. And then in the year 2031, it is just about 1.2 million people. And the next slide tells you about this diagnosis gap. So the graph line at the bottom is the one in which we are diagnosing people. We are diagnosing about 47% of people. The top line is what we should be diagnosing. And the gap between the top line and the bottom line is called the diagnosis gap. And I'm hoping that after today, for example, that one or two people might refer their nans or maybe another family member or a friend to the GP, to a memory clinic, to be diagnosed. And that's the only way in which we're going to close that diagnosis gap. Now, some of my colleagues in GP land will say, what's the use? What's the use of making the diagnosis early? It's going to get worse. And the person is going to lose their memory, and they might become aggressive, and they might have to end up in a care home. So why make the diagnosis early? So what I'm going to ask you to consider with me now is, why should Betty be scared of John going to the GP to get a diagnosis? Why should John be afraid to go to the GP? What do you think would be those things which would stop you from making a diagnosis?
I'm afraid of the truth, because I've been through it.
And that was your big fear?
Yes, unfortunately at first, yes, because it comes on very gradually, and I was very frightened when they came round, and nurse came round, and I didn't want to hear about it. And I forgot
So it came on very gradually,
and
and you just didn't want to know the truth. Because the truth is almost something like you've got cancer. Okay? Right, what other reasons would you say why, for example, John should make an appointment? Please.
I was thinking that maybe he won't want to be labelled.
He doesn't want to be labelled, he doesn't want to be stigmatized. Very important thing, and that is important especially in younger people. A younger person does not want to be labelled with a dementia, because it's something which makes you morally weak. It's not right. Okay? Stigmatized, you get a label. Right, so why do you think he should go to the doctor, get the diagnosis?
So that his pain is explained, so he gets support he needs.
You know, what you've said sounds pretty stupid. She said to have his behaviour explained, to make the family and for him to understand what it is that's going on with him. It sounds, well, you know, not very much, but it's incredibly important. If a person has been diagnosed with prostate cancer, you would want to know what prostate cancer is. You want to know, where's the prostate? You would want to know, what can they do? What are the percentages of survival? What does radiotherapy mean? What does chemotherapy mean? You'd want to know all of these things. So, in fact, one of the reasons that John would go to the GP is for the family to get information, for the family to be educated. Another reason? Yes? There is medication available. We can talk about medication again. Does the medication cure?
No.
No. The medication slows it down. Excellent. And somebody there was... Were you going to say medication? Yes. Yes, because the type of dementia is important to me as a doctor, but it's also important to explain certain behaviours of a person with dementia. Any other reasons why you should be going?
Possibly to access other services. We refer to charities or sports services.
Okay. Julie, do you want to just put up your hand? Julie is from the Alzheimer's Society. Julie has got the stand outside, and it is a good thing to refer earlier to Julie. Julie isn't as scary as a doctor, but Julie also has information. Julie also has support and is able to make suggestions about support. Other agencies would be social care, not because you're needy, but because social care actually offers services which are incredibly important. So that's another reason. Some more reasons? Yes?
Would it be to give the patient the opportunity to plan later on when they've still got the
You read my next slide, didn't you? Yes, absolutely. Yes, it would be a matter of if I know that I've got dementia, if I know that I've got prostate cancer, I want to start planning ahead. And what's the importance of not delaying that planning is because I want to plan while my brain cells are still working well. I don't want to wait until my brain cells have deteriorated to the point where I cannot plan. Excellent. Something else? And yes.
And you help the carers as well, the ones that got care for the person.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. It's when you develop dementia, it's not only the person with dementia, it's also the family members, the son or the daughter, the next door neighbour, the cousin, or the husband or wife needs support as well. And once again, that is what the Alzheimer's Society is so good at doing, including other organisations, for instance, like Age UK, or what do they call them, Age Concern, and carers in Bedfordshire, and
there's things like you can have a carer come in and sit with the person with dementia while the other person has a sleep or does something with their arm for a couple of hours or 4 hours a week. That person can be relieved and you can sit there with the person.
So you're talking about a sitting service, isn't it? Excellent. So it's that type of thing that can be arranged. Nobody has spoken about driving. Yeah, it is to start considering whether you should continue driving or not. And nobody's spoken about a will. It's the opportunity to think about your will that you've made, and do you want to change it? Not because you're going to drop dead tomorrow, but because you want to be able to use your brain to make the changes you want to change. And then something that's called lasting power of attorney. If you do it early, it can cost you as little as £120. If you do it later, when the person's lost the ability to understand it, it can cost you over £2,000. I've got is to talk about the advantages to me, or just plain straight good sense, of people going to be diagnosed earlier rather than later. And I think we touched on most of those things. Just wanted to ask, who understands what lasting power of attorney is? Who knows about lasting power of attorney? Do you know about it? Yes. Okay, and you know, and you know, you also know. Have you got lasting power of attorney for somebody else?
Yeah, my mother.
Right. If you don't mind, you don't have to, please. Would you like to explain what lasting power of attorney is?
Right. Well, in my understanding of it, my father had died. My mother was 78. So fit in health and everything like that. And she asked whether my sister and I, when she was no longer able to make her own decisions financially or otherwise, that either my sister or myself would do it for her. So she then went to the solicitor and it was drawn up there. I wasn't present at the time. I did it by proxy, but so that's my understanding. So when she is now 91, I'm still very fit and capable, mentally and physically. But when and if that comes to the time, then my sister and I would take over and could deal with her financial and her social situation.
Okay, that's really, to my mind, it's a really good explanation of what it is. So can I just ask, how many different types of lasting power of attorney are there? Right, there are 2 types, and do you want to just tell me which one type it is?
I only know
Okay, you don't only know there's 2, you know?
finance and health and wellbeing.
Right, so the one is financial and property. Those 2 go together, and most people have it for finances and property. And the second one is for?
Health and wellbeing.
Is for personal welfare and health care. That's a different one. So when you do a lasting power of attorney, you've got to have 2 interviews. The one for property and financial affairs, and the other one for personal welfare and health care. And essentially, the earlier you do it, the more the person is able to understand the information you're giving, understand what an attorney is and what the powers of the attorney are, the cheaper it is. And guess what? You don't have to go to a solicitor. You can download the paperwork, and I understand from somebody that I spoke to recently, you can now even go online and you can complete a lasting power of attorney. Who's done that online? Have you done recently, was it?
The power of attorney was registered in November last year, so
So quite recently. So you can even do it online. And all that you fork out is something like £120, which is for a registration fee with the Court of Protection.
that's for each one.
That's for each one. So it's £120 for property and financial affairs, and then £120 for personal welfare and health care. And I'm sure that you've researched this, where if in fact you have left it too late, it would cost you about £1,000 for each one of those. So it is so important to do that earlier rather than later, and that's a reason why John should go to the GP and be assessed earlier rather than later. You've got to
When you say too late, do you mean lax capacity? Because I just think you can get power of attorney if you lack capacity.
Yeah. And so you've raised the spectre of capacity. Capacity means that you've got the brain power to understand something. When you've got the brain power to understand it, you can make a decision. So if you have capacity, it means that you've got the brain power to know what lasting power of attorney is. But when you lose capacity, it means that you can't make those decisions, and then, as you will know from your reading, you then have to become a deputy. You go to the Court of Protection and say, I want to be a deputy for my dad. And that costs a lot of money. Thank you very much for that. Another one that I might tell you about, I think it might just be, no, it's not on there, is, for example, advanced decision to refuse treatment. If I say, when I'm aged 92 years old and I'm diagnosed with prostate cancer, I can say to my family, and I can even write it down for them, that I don't wish to have an operation, I don't want chemotherapy, I don't want radiotherapy. Now that's my decision, it's not my family's decision. If I write that down, sign it and witness it, that becomes a legal document, and people aren't allowed to treat me or subject me to an operation. If I decide at age 72, if my heart suddenly stops, my breathing stops, I don't want to be resuscitated. I don't want somebody jumping in my chest. As I know, very often you can suffer brain damage because of the lack of oxygen. Now, that's my decision, not yours. And if I put that down and sign it, that's an advanced decision to refuse treatment, and that's legal. Okay? So that's certainly something you can think about, as is something called an advanced statement. Advanced statement does not have to be put out on paper. You don't have to go to a solicitor but it might be something like this. I do not wish to be admitted to Ward 16 at the Luton and Dunstable Hospital because that is where my father passed away and my younger brother passed away. Now, it doesn't mean that the hospital then have to find you another ward, but I'm expressing a wish. And people then do everything they can not to admit me to Ward 16. And that's called an advance statement. Okay? So all of these things are things that you can do. It might be that when you wrote out your last will, there were 2 grandchildren. Now there are 6 grandchildren, and one of those of your sons or daughters has got divorced, so they remarried, and they're now stepchildren. You might like to change your will to look at those changed circumstances. You would want to do that at a time when you can still reason things through and you can make decisions about changing a will. I certainly think it's important. The DVLA, I'm going to explode a myth. And the myth is that when you develop dementia, you can no longer drive a car. That is rubbish. What the DVLA tell you is that when you develop dementia, you must tell the DVLA that you've developed dementia. It's a legal requirement. The DVLA then send a questionnaire to the GP or to the psychiatrist that's made the diagnosis. The doctor then answers a bunch of questions. The answers get sent back to the DVLA. The DVLA will decide what should be done. In the majority of cases, I understand that the DVLA say, continue driving, but every year you must go back to your GP so that your GP can make sure that you can still drive a car safely. A small percentage of people with dementia won't be able to drive a car because, exactly what you said, their spatial recognition, their judgment of distance has gone completely out the window and it's not safe for them to go, or like you said, they become disinhibited and they start taking chances. Their judgment goes, and certainly if we knew about it, we'll put that on that questionnaire. So the myth is, if you have dementia, you must stop driving. Nonsense. Okay? It depends from case to case. Is there a question about driving? Is there a question about lasting power of attorney? Question about advanced decision or advanced statements? Maybe somebody wants to give me another example. Yeah.
All right. My 2 sons, as I say, Arthur is their stepfather, and they did say to me that if anything happens to Arthur, they wouldn't want to be responsible. Now, that does worry me. What do I do?
Right, so the 2 stepsons say that they don't want to be responsible for your father, for your husband. The thing is, if you have the brain power, you can choose anybody you wish to be your attorney. It does not have to be your husband or wife. It doesn't have to be a son or a daughter. It can be anybody that you wish. It could be the next door neighbour. It could be a solicitor. It could be a favourite nephew. It could be a grandchild. When it comes to deputyship, when a person has lost the capacity to make a decision, very often you'll find that a husband or a wife or the children will say, well, we need to be the deputies. You don't have to have 3 deputies, you can have 1 deputy. So it is the person who's best placed to be able to make decisions for property, finances, personal welfare, health care.
There's only one problem, like I'm deputy for Arthur. Suppose something happens to me.
Yes.
That's my worry.
What happens if there's something that happens to you? And that is why very often you choose a younger member of the family or a younger person to be the deputy, or in fact you have 2 or 3 deputies, not all of the same age. I suggest that if you get stuck with a lasting power of attorney, not quite sure what to do, my suggestion is go to a solicitor, say, solicitor, here's my £50, listen to my story for half an hour and give me advice. And the solicitor will then, if you give them all the information, will give you advice, they won't do anything else. Or if you wish, you don't want to go to a solicitor, you can go to Age Concern, Age UK, or you can go to Citizens Advice, or you can even phone the Alzheimer's Society National Helpline number, and they will give you not legal advice, but they will give you sound advice in what to do in your particular circumstances. Now, what would stop John and Betty from seeking help? Now, I think we went down 2 tracks, didn't we? We spoke about the fear of the word dementia. We also spoke about stigma. But you know what the most common reason is the second to last one. The fear of admission to a care home. And what I think we need to accept is the older we are, the more we lived in a time when nobody wanted you, or you became too bad, you were dumped in a care home. And care homes were places which were worse than prisons, because you weren't really well looked after. And it was almost as if you were confined to this place and you were locked up and the key was thrown away. And the good news about a care home is that currently 2/3 of people with dementia continue to live in the community. To me, that's an absolute tribute to social care. And believe it or not, of those 2/3, 20%, so 1/5 of those living in the community actually live alone. They've got dementia and they live alone. Once again, to me, a tribute to social care. To be able to support a person in the community. It's only a very small percentage of people who actually go into care, and usually it's very evident. It is people who really, where their behaviour is such that they cannot be looked after in the community, or they've got physical problems together with dementia, where they really do need 24-hour care. And nowadays, can I assure you, in this time of austerity, it is very difficult to get a person into a care home, even if everybody decides they should go to a care home. The bar is being raised. You have to meet very stringent criteria to be able to be admitted. And then I'm going to go on to the question you said about inheritance. Did you say? I'm going to talk about that in some other slides, but I'm worried we're not going to get to it. I want you to think about people under the age of 65, and I want you to think about people over the age of 65. The younger you are under the age of 65, the greater is the chance that if you develop dementia, it is because of a genetic problem. Hence, if my father developed dementia at age 58 and he had 2 children, the chances are that one of the 2 children will develop a dementia at an early age as well. So inheritance or genetics is very important the younger you are when the person develops dementia. The older you are, over the age of 65, 70, 75, 80 years old, the greater the chances of developing dementia because of Age. Because of age. So, if my grandmother developed dementia at age 89, the chances of me developing a dementia is not on the basis of my genes, not because of on the basis of inheritance, it's because of age. I must admit to you that the small print will say that if you have more than one family member with Alzheimer's disease, especially developing Alzheimer's disease over the age of 65, your chances are very slightly increased of developing it. Very slightly increased. So the message to you is, if you have a family member who is very much older, 70s, 80s, don't you go and have sleepless nights that you are going to develop a dementia. I would, however, have sleepless nights if my mother developed dementia at age 55. I'd be worried I'm going to develop it on the basis of genes. Does that answer that question? I'm going to talk about something I spoke to you at the interval, and talk about Down's syndrome. Down syndrome is also called trisomy. Trisomy? What is it called? Trisomy 23. Trisomy means 3. How many chromosomes pairs do we have? Right? And how many in a pair? 2. And in some people there are 3 instead of 2. Those people, if it's on chromosome number 23, will develop Down syndrome. And we know that in Down syndrome, people with Down syndrome will develop an Alzheimer's disease very, very early on in their years. They'll develop a dementia of the Alzheimer type at age 45, 50, 55. So there's a definite genetic link. Okay? Down syndrome, you develop dementia very early on. That used to not be a problem. And it used to not be a problem because people with Down syndrome die very, very early from other physical problems. But now, because of medical science, we're able to operate and we're able to give the person quality of life and length of life, but unfortunately, they can then develop a Alzheimer's dementia. So, how is the diagnosis made? I'm going to concentrate purely on the first one, the story. Those of us who deal with persons with dementia in the memory clinic, once we sit down with the person and get the story from family members and from the person themselves, can basically make the diagnosis without any further investigations. The reason we perform other investigations like blood tests, ECGs, and scans of the brain is to make sure that that dementia is not there because of another condition. And I'm going to, pick on the nurses again. What other medical conditions might cause something which looks like a dementia but is in fact not a dementia?
UTI.
That will cause a delirium, and a delirium will be very much like, remember John, in hospital, he was confused, suspicious, he was seeing things, he was aggressive, but then it went away, didn't it, with the antibiotics and got better. So yes, a delirium might be like a dementia, but it will go away. Another condition?
Like a thyroid.
Excellent, excellent. So a lazy thyroid or hypothyroidism, a thyroid gland that doesn't work as it should be. if that happens, the picture looks like dementia. But if you do a blood test, you'd be able to diagnose it, and it just needs a little tablet called thyroxine, and hey presto, the dementia picture will go away. Right? Another condition, another common conditions. Yes?
Is depression?
Ah, that's the one I wanted. Depression is very, very common. Some depressions can become so severe that you develop something called a pseudo-dementia. It's not a proper dementia, but the person acts in the same way as a person with dementia. You treat that depression and the dementia goes away. And now, unless somebody has got the next condition, or if one of the nurses can tell me what other condition mimics a dementia, and it's all got to do with a vitamin. Yes.
Vitamin B12 deficiency.
Excellent. Yes. Yes.
No,
forget about Korsakoff's. Vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is in certain foodstuffs, especially red meats. In the stomach lining, as the stomach lining ages, so a chemical isn't released by the stomach lining, so your body can't absorb vitamin B12. You can then develop a pernicious anemia or a vitamin B12 shortage, and that can cause a picture which is very much like a dementia. It can be picked up by a blood test, you have injections, and hey presto, the dementia picture goes away. And that is why we do blood tests. The scan, we do the scan of the brain, not to make the diagnosis, but to make sure that a person hasn't got a growth or a cancer. Of all the thousands of people that I've seen, I've possibly picked up 5 brain cancers. So it's very, very seldom. The most important is to look at the degree of vascular dementia, to look at the thinning of the blood vessels. If it's minor thinning, minimal thinning of the blood vessels, I would say, really and truly, that's Alzheimer's disease. But if there's strokes or there's severe thinning of the blood vessels, this is more like a vascular dementia. But forget about all of that. The main thing is a good old story. If the story is so very, very typical. Anything you'd like me to explain to you about the diagnosis? Anything you're not quite sure about?
There's one thing on the past mental health history. Is that linked to if someone's got a history of depression specifically?
If a person has a history of a chronic, enduring mental illness like schizophrenia, like manic depression, long history of severe depression, severe anxiety, those people are at a greater risk of developing a dementia. And then obviously if somebody had a postnatal depression 40 years ago, and they now develop a dementia-like picture, I want to make sure that the depression has not come back. Okay. So, that's the story. Now, can it be inherited? And this is exactly what we spoke about. People at age 65, 5% will develop dementia. At age 90, 30%, and we learned that very, very early on. So, for example, if John and Betty's children, Daniel and Dawn, are more likely to develop a dementia in their later life because of their age, and not because they've inherited it from John. Whereas, if you develop a dementia under the age of 65, for instance, John develops a dementia at age 58, there's a 30 to 50% chance that Daniel or even Dawn will develop a dementia. I hope that one is clear. And now we're going to be talking about delirium. I think you mentioned delirium, didn't you? Right. So a delirium is important. I'm going to give you an example. A 72-year-old man, fit, recently retired completely, still active in his community life, went into hospital with a severe chest infection. He was treated, but whilst he was being treated for this chest infection, he became suspicious, aggressive, pulling out his drips, trying to get out of bed, seeing scary faces, was suspicious about what was going on in the bed next to him, couldn't sleep, and also became very confused. That man was sent to my ward because they thought he had developed a dementia. Now, I don't often use these words, but I knew it was rubbish, because you don't develop a dementia overnight. And what we diagnosed him with is him having a delirium. We kept him on our ward because he was so disturbed. And about 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, his delirium started going away, and I was able to discharge him back home, and he lived a completely normal life. 2 years later, this gentleman came to my memory clinic, and I diagnosed a dementia. So what research has shown us is that a perfectly well person with no memory problems, if they develop a delirium, 2 years later there could be a good chance that that person will develop a dementia. And I try and sell that idea to GPs because I think that this is a very important warning sign. So I'm going to talk about this. Can we prevent dementia? And you know what? We can cut down our risk of developing dementia. Not by going to university and college and having an apprenticeship, but by doing all of those things that we love doing and we know it is wrong for us to do it. Because of being overweight, eating the wrong types of foods, by smoking, over and misusing alcohol, and not taking our diabetes medication as we should, and not taking our antihypertensive medication as we should, we are in fact increasing our risk for developing a vascular dementia. So in fact, if we could get ourselves so disciplined to be lean, slim, eat rabbit food, and exercise, and do all the right things, we can in fact reduce our risk of developing especially a vascular type of dementia. Any questions about that? Right, we've got 9 minutes. On the dot, 4 o'clock. Imagine there are going to be lots of red alarm bells, and there are going to be red lights, because then that is us finished. So what I'd like to do now is to leave the remaining 9 minutes for you to put questions to me or to share experiences with the others. 9 minutes, let's go. Yes?
Can I just ask a quick question about cognitive reserve? You say about university students being less likely to develop dementia. What about if you're a mature student in your 40s and you suddenly go to university? Does that help, or is the damage done by that point?
Wonderful question. It's a wonderful question because those people who are at the point of retirement, very close to retirement, or have retired, I will encourage them to keep their brain active, to keep their brain out of retirement. Not by doing word search and brain games on a computer, but to get out of the house and socialise. University of third age, developing a new hobby, doing a sport, going visiting more often, Scrabble, pub quizzes, and so forth. The more we keep our brain out of retirement, the more we actually push back the possibility of developing a dementia. If you want to know more about it, Julie from Alzheimer's Society has got a little booklet called Be Headstrong. And Be Headstrong helps us to understand how we can push back the tide of dementia. So, excellent question. Right, next one? Yes.
When you say B12, what food is that then? What food shouldn't you really eat?
So vitamin B12 is a very important ingredient which has got to do with our nervous system and the way that our brain works. It is found very often in red meats and nuts. And it's not a matter of not eating any of those. What the matter is the lining of the stomach, which doesn't produce a chemical to absorb it into the body. And therefore, you unfortunately then have to have injections to repair the level of vitamin B12. If you've developed a picture like dementia and you have the vitamin B12 injections, the picture like dementia will in fact go away. Right? Questions? Yes.
You mentioned that the John's and Betty's children, does it go further to the grandchildren?
The possibility
of dementia, does it go further?
There are, let me explain it this way. In the UK, there are about 3 or 4 families where every single one of the family members will develop a dementia. They will develop a dementia. Now, that's called familial Alzheimer's disease. But I didn't even miss 1 minute's sleep on that because they are very, very few families and it's clearly a genetic link. Whereas if my grandmother developed dementia and my great-grandmother developed dementia, my mum has developed dementia, I would become a bit twitchy because in fact it might be that there is something in their genes which might suggest. But once again, if I get to the age of 89 and I haven't developed dementia, I'll be very, very happy. Okay? So it could be that very small increased chance.
We can use words to help people with dementia. They can read, and that seems to trigger something in their mind that is where I want to go, or that's where the kettle is.
Indeed, reminiscence is important, and recognizing words or using words is important.
In daily living.
And that's given me an opportunity to tell you that together with colleagues from Houghton Regis, together with Julie from the Alzheimer's Society, we have a dementia support group. The dementia support group runs once a month. It is held at the Priory Church Hall, just a stone's throw from here, opposite Aldi, opposite the Old Palace Lodge. Our next meeting is on the 21st of February. And at that particular meeting, I've asked a number of people to bring exhibitions to that meeting so that the people who go can actually look at things and ask questions. One of the things is Eileen, our occupational therapist, is bringing a device called a REM pod. And a REM pod means everything is packed in a pod. When you take it out of the pod, you rig it up. This particular one that she's going to bring is like a dance floor, a dance hall, with props and then also various pieces of information, various items, which will remind a person about a dance hall approximately 50, 60 years ago. And she's actually going to bring that REM pod to show us. So reminiscence is important. Those people who know a person with dementia will know that if you start talking to a man about the Second World War, suddenly the person will come alive, because they remember those things. Or it could be that a woman will suddenly get up from a chair and start dancing when she hears certain music which was in the vogue when she was a young adult. That is reminiscence.
Yes, I worked with people who had been living in a coal mining village, but they'd moved down to Leicester and were away from it. But if you could say, what did you do when you went to the village shop, and did you see, and what? And that brought back a lot of conversation and memory.
And you don't need thousands of pounds, do you?
No,
you
not
just
at all.
need to talk about those things that
That's
they
right.
might be able to remember.
That's right.
The alarm bells are going to ring in a minute. Can we have another question? Yes.
I'm just curious about the importance of nutrition and whether organic foods or legal oils or anything like that should be doing something now to sort of prevent the
I think that nutrition is important in the sense that you eat in such a way that you don't develop cerebrovascular risk factors, diabetes, high blood pressure, hypercholesterolemia, that develop into ischemic heart disease, strokes, and so forth. That is the extent to which I would go. But unfortunately, vegetarians, for example, are at as great a risk of developing dementia as somebody who is not a vegetarian. And I think a lot of people would actually be saying the type of food you eat and the way in which it's manufactured is unhealthy for us. Think about the sandwich you had at lunchtime and you'll just know how packed it is with, for instance, salt. Okay? Right, we've come to the end. I would like to say a very, very big thank you to every single one of you who's come today. I think